You've come for the egg.
Here it is.
Are you mad? You've never survived this.
Well, happily, neither would you.
To choose violence here is to declare war against your king.
Wonderful.
Even if it ends in the death of your unborn child and its mother.
When you play the game of microphones, you win or you die. From within the House of Black and White, it's Lord Sterling, Sir Duncan.
Well met, spurned second sons and conspiring small counselors, and welcome to Game of Microphones. I'm Lord Sterling, Sir Duncan the Fearsome. That's right, you're hanging with the litter-riding, dragon-flying, egg-thieving, kiss-stealing, crab-feeding, maiden-pleasing son of a gun. And I'm having a hard time keeping this steel sheathed.
Oh, and I am Lord Zach, feeder of all crabs.
Welcome to episode 122.
On this episode, we're covering the second episode of House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 2, The Rogue Prince.
And in case you're not already aware, this podcast is from the perspective of someone who's current on the show. That means you've seen all previously aired episodes of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. And if not, there's still time to be eaten alive by hungry crabs, so you don't have to hear these spoilers.
Warning.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. In consideration of further spoiler avoidance, we understand that most listeners have likely not read Fire and Blood, which covers this period of the Targaryen reign. Therefore, we will only be discussing events from the Dance of the Dragons that have already come to pass on House of the Dragon, and we will take caution not to spoil drama that is still to come on the show. Without any further ado, let's get into our top 5 highlights of House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 1, The Rogue Prince. All right. Top 5. You want to start off with your number 5, Lord Zach?
All right, absolutely. My number 5 is the crab feeder.
Yes.
Man, so we just get a quick glimpse of him at the very beginning, just with the mayhem on the beach. Really, like, it reminded me of some Greg Nicotero, practical effects from The Walking Dead.
You could see the muscles inside of the skin moving at one point.
Yeah, how just decayed some of the bodies were. And it's like, okay, they're all dead. And then there's like the little crabs crawling on one guy, and then he moves and kind of comes back to life. And it was just super hardcore. It's like, oh, a lot of these people are still alive.
So brutal.
And then we see him, he kind of, at the very end when Daemon and Corlys Velaryon are talking, they show him again. And is actually one of the more iconic scenes from some of the trailers. It's like, who's this guy with a hammer, like hammering on the beach,
crucifying people?
You only get a quick glimpse of it in those trailers. So now we know, it's the crab feeder.
Crab feeder. What an epic concept!
Really cool to see what he's doing with these, sailors, and a lot of them are probably just merchants, but they are just pirating the ships, and taking the crew, taking all the spices and whatever goods are in their cargo holds, and just leaving everybody that they capture, and they kill some of them and leave the rest to be eaten alive by crabs. Oh, what a way to go!
What a way to go! So brutal. And did you notice that a lot of people are pointing out that his helmet is kind of remindful of the Sons of the Harpies, his mask? Sorry, kind of remindful of those guys.
Yeah, it kind of, it does look like a mask, but his shoulder and some of his arm, like, it looked a lot like Jorah when he had the bad grayscale.
Oh, the grayscale.
So
True.
I'm thinking, is this guy basically condemned already?
So he's just going crazy.
And he's just making the most of life, nothing to lose, and just going all out. doing whatever he wants to do, basically becoming king of the Stepstones, for lack of a better term.
Right.
So it's, but I mean, it does look like a mask because there's like metal over his nose, and they have a good, front on shot at the very, very end, the closing,
his face is all messed up. He's got scars that just rip through the flesh, and like you can see a deep depression running down his cheek. It reminds me of Alex Terrible from the band Slaughter to Prevail.
Okay, sort of reminds me of some of the Bond villains where they're like, deformed and, half of a mask or something like that. It was a different looking, villain, if you will, than a lot of the Game of Thrones, villains that we've seen. Is very almost otherworldly, but I'm here for it.
But did he have barnacles on him? I'm trying to remember. I feel like there were barnacles somewhere.
Right. There were when we almost at the very end when they cut from when Viserys announces who he's going to marry, and then they just go straight to Corlys and Daemon talking at Driftmark. There's like it's like a good 3 or 4 second hold, slow zoom and hold on this. It looks like a pot, but it's not a pot. It's like a piece of, a sculpture or something. And there's like, it's like a face, but it's got all these barnacles or something on the side of it.
Oh,
and that seemed like it was cool. Symbolic, or I don't know. It was pretty interesting, but it's like some random art or something.
The Office of a Nautical Adventurer.
Yeah, you'd have all kind of cool stuff like that. Okay, yeah, and he's called Crab Feeder, but his name is Kragas Drahar.
Ooh, that's a cool name. Garrett always comes up with like cool names for this show.
Very
really cool.
And they went with Kragas Crab Feeder to give you your CC alliteration.
Nice. Anything else you want to mention about that?
No, I don't think so. I think this upcoming episode we will get some good conflict between Daemon and the Crab Feeder, and possibly Corlys. I can't remember exactly how this plays out in the books. Don't want to give anything away, but obviously that's what Corlys is trying to get Daemon to do is solve a problem for Corlys, but at the same time it's a chance for Daemon to prove his worth and his abilities to King Viserys, the Small Council, and everybody else, while at the same time, solving a pretty big problem for Corlys Velaryon and his fleet.
Yeah, I'm liking Corlys, man. He seems like a pretty cool dude, except for the whole marry my 12-year-old daughter thing. But hey, it's the times, what are we going to do about it?
The custom of the day, I guess.
While we're talking about the beginning, why don't we talk about the new intro for a moment? I was pretty excited personally that they used the same theme song from the original Game of Thrones show. For me, I appreciated that. It seems like that's like a unifying factor between the shows that'll signify that they're all part of the same universe and stuff. I know a lot of people were upset and were hoping for a new piece of music and everything, but I like that they kept it the same. Although the graphics that go along with it are a little bit confusing. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I really liked it a lot. When it first came on, I was like, okay, the first few bars are the same. I'm like, are they going to tweak it or do something interesting with it? But, they didn't, which, at this point, it's almost timeless. I mean, it's in that song is in the zeitgeist. It's been on probably The Simpsons. It's been on South Park.
Yeah.
It's been everywhere. Everybody knows that tune.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Wiener.
There's that, and So they're using the original song, but they're doing a whole new, graphic overlay. So I really liked it. When I first thought about it, I was like, I would really want a new original piece of music, from Ramin Djawadi.
That's what I was expecting too.
Just out of the, my selfishness, but just to hear something new and original. There's so many great songs from the original series, but like you said, this is basically going forward going to solidify the GOTCU, Game of Thrones Extended Cinematic Universe, a GOTECU, or whatever, if you want to call it that.
Right.
Because they have the MCU and the DCEU anyway. So, if they're going to, they scrapped the Long Night project, but if they're going to do a Jon Snow project, if they're going to do 10,000 ships project, there's a lot of stuff in development that obviously, like the Long Night, just because it's in development don't mean that it's going to get made.
Yep.
But if they're going to really, go for it, and HBO, has the money, if they continue to have the money going forward after Warner Brothers and all their financial issues, hopefully they can continue to fund. But I mean, if HBO Max is getting the subscriptions to go along with however many, 10 million, 20 million eyeballs that watched the premiere last week.
It's a lot of liquidity.
So they should be able to cash flow that, turn it into a net positive to make the network money to where they can continue to fund big, sprawling, epic
dragon
shows
fights.
And project. Yeah, mainly CGI budgets for the dragons. But I really like the original music, and it's going to tie all the shows together probably going forward.
I love that. It's so cool.
And then the visualization of the intro, basically it looks like a piece of old Valyrian architecture, and then they're sort of starting at the top and just kind of swirling and moving down as they go through it. And a few things I've seen that people are thinking that each of those little medallions or little sigils or whatever is representing a Targaryen king.
Yeah.
And or a daughter that marries a king.
And we're seeing the literal bloodline.
Right. The bloodline from Aegon, down to his son, Maegor, and on and on
with
down
the
to
various
Jaehaerys.
Children.
And then it splits, with Emma and Viserys here. And then I did notice the one near the end, I think it's right when George's name comes up, before it says Fire and Blood. I think executive producer George R. R. Martin is that little, it looks like the symbol of the Trinity, sort of, this on that necklace that Daemon gave Rhaenyra. So I'm pretty sure that little symbol is for Rhaenyra, is near the end, which, I mean, makes sense because she's right now the end of the Targaryen bloodline in history at this point. And then kind of goes from there.
So they've taken the symbol on the necklace and transposed that onto the visual bloodline thing to symbolize her as the next heir in line at this moment, basically. Right.
And the medallion right before that was, I think it showed Viserys and Emma right together. And his little medallion was like the shape of his crown.
Yeah.
It's pretty, I mean, it's not basic crown, but I mean, it's, I don't know how to describe it,
It's low fantasy as opposed to high fantasy.
Right. It's not super fancy or anything, but obviously very functional. But the kind of from a side view, a profile view of his crown is his medallion. I can't think of a better term for each of those little pieces on the that whole opening sequence. So some of the ones like of Aegon at the very beginning just look like a dragon. I couldn't really tell. So there were some interesting different ones, but like in the original show, it changed from episode to episode. If we were going to be in Marine and King's Landing and Winterfell, those were the places it showed on that episode. With this one, because it's the bloodline, I don't really know if it will change at all week to week.
I think it's going to, because this show covers a span of like 30 some odd years, right? And heirs may change. Things may happen that could alter the path of the blood flow and the bloodline, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the intro.
Yeah, because we already got a 6-month time jump from episode 1 to 2. So.
Yeah, and a 9-year time jump from the intro scene of episode 1 to the beginning of the actual show, or to the first shot of the dragon, Rhaenyra riding a dragon. So we've already gotten 9.5 years at this point.
Exactly. So I really liked it a lot. And at the very end, all kind of culminates. It kind of shows you the whole thing from the top of the pyramid, all the way down, and then flows past, Viserys and Emma and Rhaenyra. And then it shows you, basically the bottom of it. And it's, the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen, and all the edges, the different little individual waterfalls of blood, are kind of pouring into it. So visually, the end is really, really good.
So cool. I like how one of the first shots, the first shot after the crab eater scene, is also a glass of wine being poured into a cup, and it evokes that blood dripping from the intro sequence as well to bring us back to it.
That's right.
I was like, oh man, they're drinking blood over there. All right, so we move on to my number 5.
Absolutely.
All right, counting down and down this week as opposed to last week where I had just 8 random points. My number 5 this week is Viserys' indecisiveness, or maybe more accurately, his unwillingness to do what must be done in his efforts to preserve Jaehaerys' peace. So there are a few scenes throughout the show that kind of exemplify this indecisiveness, and the first of which is the small council meeting at the beginning, when Corlys barges in and announces that 4 of his ships have been lost in the Stepstones, and it's grown into a conflagration over there, which is an awesome word that I used in the Core Saga recently. Like an eruption of fire and a raging inferno. And basically, Viserys doesn't plan on taking the type of decisive action that Corlys wants to see. He says, I don't want compensation. I want to seize the Stepstones by force and burn out this crab feeder. And Viserys is like, whoa, hold on here. And I'm sending some envoys, like the weakest possible thing he could do. And it's apparent to me that a major theme of this entire episode is the indecisiveness of Viserys as we move along. And so he doesn't want to start a war, but what Corlys is suggesting and what Rhaenyra suggests later wouldn't necessarily start a war. It'd be like kind of like an individual battle. It would just mean engaging in a minor battle to defend his bannermen, who are having their ships ransacked by these lawless pirates over in the free cities.
Right. So it's in the interest of Westeros to have those shipping lanes open,
and
not be constantly being harassed and the ships being taken, burned, looted, and losing all the crews.
Right. Like you don't want to start a war, but they've already declared war effectively by closing the shipping lanes and doing this. So what are you going to do? Just put up with it? Viserys has a way of just letting everybody walk all over him because he doesn't want to start a fight. It's like he grew up during the reign of Jaehaerys in this prolonged period of peace. And his main goal is to preserve the peace, but it's at the cost of everything falling apart. He grew up in this like luxurious bubble of peace that prevents him from seeing the nature of reality and how peace isn't commonplace and it's not normal. It's the exception rather than the rule. So he's sort of afflicted with this normalcy bias that prevents him from taking the action or understanding the situation in the ways that he should as a king, unfortunately. What do they say? Hard times breed strong men make, good times, which is Jaehaerys, and then good times breed weak men, and that's Viserys. And then weak men make hard times, and hard times make strong men again, and the cycle just begins all over again.
Yep.
So he says the pirates are not the free cities, and someone mentions, well, who do you think provides them with their ships and tender? And this reminded me of like a real life historical parallel where oftentimes pirates were funded kind of like on the side by European kings and queens hundreds of years ago. Privateers going around ransacking ships and causing havoc on the high seas, all at the whim or behest of the royalty, which was kind of interesting in some cases, at least. Interestingly, here someone mentions, well, what reason does the crab feeder have to fear us? And in my head, I'm thinking, dragons, like that's a pretty good reason to fear us. And Viserys' action here, in his inaction, is just encouraging people to run roughshod all over them, including Daemon. And this whole time, Rhaenyra is listening to the conversation, and Corlys here is getting more and more bold as he mentions Daemon on Dragonstone, who's been there for 6 months. And Otto has to shut him down a little bit here, telling him, I caution you, Lord Corlys, a seat at the king's table does not make you his equal. And Corlys is getting more and more bold. He's powerful, and if he's not appeased, he'll end up taking action himself, as we see later. But it's an interesting statement by Sir Otto, as his seat at the table has made him bolder and bolder throughout the years as well. Considering his reign as Hand began under Jaehaerys, the previous king, when Jaehaerys' best friend, his BFF, and Hand Septon Barth died. Sir Otto took over and effectively began running the kingdom. On a related note, anything Septon Barth says seems to be good as gold. So if you ever hear anything about Septon Barth, take heed and pay attention to what he's saying. But yeah, it seems again and again that Sir Otto is the one who seems to be really in charge here, as we'll see later. And there may be a potential conspiracy going on between him and the Maesters, who the Citadel where the Maesters train is at Hightower in Old Town, where Hightower is the seat of Hightower, the Hightower house. So it could make sense that they're kind of colluding together if they have similar goals. And as Viserys tells him, I have acted, Corlys. I've sent envoys to Pentos to see if we can find common cause. You can see the bandage on his pinky finger from his wound that we saw 6 months ago in the previous episode, where he pricked himself on the throne right at the end of the episode. And this is another instance, his wounded, festering hand, where his inaction and refusing to do what might be necessary may have negative connotations or negative results, as we see with the scene with the maggots. He's taking half actions. He's trying to have the maggots heal him, even though it's getting worse. And may amputation be a better solution? He doesn't want to amputate. Doesn't want to attack the crab feeder. He doesn't want to take Daemon out from Dragonstone. All of this inaction and half measures seem to be his style as a ruler, which is just not working out very well at all. What do you think about that?
No, yeah, it reminds me of Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah?
He tells Walt, no more half measures. And really from that point, Walter White, goes full Heisenberg.
Nice.
And takes no prisoners, from that point forward. So
nice.
Sometimes those half measures, just
are really steps backward.
Yeah, you kick the can down the road and you don't address the problem. Like, in the scene where Corlys and Rhaenys are talking with Viserys about their daughter. Corlys says either sail straight into the storm, sail around the storm, but don't just sit there and wait for the storm to overtake you.
Exactly.
Be decisive. Fortune favors the bold. So you got to make the tough call sometimes and just go for it.
Exactly. Be decisive. Just you must never await its coming. It's all he's doing is just sitting back and doing nothing. Corlys knows what's up. Corlys is a leader. I like this character, Corlys. The more things go on. And it's during that next scene also with Corlys and Rhaenys talking about, where they offer their daughter as his bride, where Viserys says, you must understand, as king, it's my obligation to avoid war until such time it's unavoidable. And that's that whole normalcy bias thing that he's acquired by growing up under the reign of the peaceful period under Jaehaerys. But nobody can be Jaehaerys. That was like a unique, impossible standard to live up to, where it's just not going to happen again. So he needs to change his tactics, but sadly, he's unable to do so, it seems. And so then we get the next scene regarding his indecision is the scene with the maggots, and there's a gross transition that's kind of funny. He's just sitting there eating dinner with Rhaenyra, and then it transitions from eating to a bowl of maggots.
Zoomed in up close. The original show did that a lot with, remember when Sam is picking all the grayscale off Jorah, how that transitions?
I'm not sure about that, but I remember when he's like cleaning all of the bedpans and stuff during his training at the Citadel.
That was like a montage. I can't remember how that transitions, but in one of the really grotesque portions where he's, picking those huge grayscale scabs off of Jorah, it's zoomed in like really, really gross. And then it transitions and it goes straight to hot pie and Arya at the end, and somebody stabs into the crust of a quail pie or pigeon pie or something like that. And it's just great. Like, oh gosh,
so funny.
I like those funny transitions like that.
I do too. They're awesome. So here the festering wound is like symbolizing or similar to how the situation with Daemon holding Dragonstone is festering. It's been 6 months. this is an issue. Whoever sits at Dragonstone has traditionally been the heir to the throne, the Prince of Dragonstone, as they're known. So for Daemon to take the seat and to take the dragon egg that's previously been chosen for the heir, it's a symbolic gesture that all of Westeros understands as him staking his claim as heir, which is, pretty intense. And Viserys has to do something, but he's not doing anything. And we get another scene, or another moment in the Maggot scene where they're talking about, he's talking about the lady Lena, how Lena Valerian's been offered as his bride, and Otto says such matters should be discussed with the small council, kind of bossing around the king. Like, who are you going to tell that to the king? He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, who's the king and who's the hand?
Yeah, exactly. The king shits, the hand wipes, as they say.
Yeah.
But so that was kind of a bold moment for Otto, and we'll see more of that as things progress. They're talking about the ups and the pros and cons of marrying Lena Valerian, and they both kind of seem to agree that it's a good plan strategically for the king and his realm. But there's subtle discouragement going on as Otto is telling him, I dearly loved my own lady wife, but the pain of her passing still haunts me, and to be compelled to replace her for duty's sake. You're the king, but I don't envy you. It's kind of like discouraging from doing it at all at that point, it seems.
Yep.
And then finally, Viserys makes a decision on his own. But it's a bad decision, a really bad one that sends the realm into chaos. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, you're talking about at the very end when he picks Alicent Hightower.
Yep.
Yeah, that is, all of this is leading up to the dance, but each and every step along the way is just getting us closer and closer to mayhem. So, if he had chosen, little, 12-year-old Lena or somebody else, things may have happened differently. And we can see Otto Hightower is extremely ambitious and trying to, he's pretty, straightforward and audacious like Tywin, but he can also be sneaky and underhanded, like you were saying last week, like Olenna Tyrell or Littlefinger or Varys. So, he's definitely a very formidable...
Littlefinger, someone I did not mention, but you mentioned it now, and I want to highlight that because there's some aesthetic similarity between Otto Hightower and Littlefinger, and I'm getting... this week particularly, I was getting Littlefinger vibes from Otto Hightower, so good call with that.
Nice.
He calls a meeting, and he announces that he's made his decision, and that he intends to marry, and Rhaenyra is looking at him, giving him the go-ahead, smiling like, yes, you can do this, because they just had their sweet little moment where they finally connected after being partially estranged for the past 6 months. And the king looks at her, and then he looks over at Alicent before he finishes saying the sentence. He kind of leaves everybody hanging. I intend to marry ... and a moment of silence. And Rhaenyra kind of looks at him like, what? And looks over at Alicent, and it's kind of in that moment that she realizes that Alicent is even there, and she's like, oh my God, you're going to say Alicent. And Alicent, hilarious. She looks more nervous than you could even describe. Great acting on this part, on her part here. She's fidgeting and kind of bouncing back and forth and all flustered. And I have a question here. I'm wondering, is she actively playing the game? Is her heart in it, or is she just doing what her father tells her and she's way in over her head? And, because there's that scene where they're reading in the Godswood and she's saying, oh, you're not worried about your position? And it made me think, oh, she's thinking in terms of the game. But I'm wondering now, is it her own ambition that has her thinking in terms of the game? Or is it just being around her father who's telling her, we need to raise our house's status. You got to do this, you got to do that. She's obsessed with picking at her nails and everything. It seems to me like she's sort of being forced into this position and that she's out of her league and out of her depth. And she's just trying to keep it together at this whole moment, or at this whole time. And at this moment, is she nervous because her own ambition may be thwarted if the king makes the wrong decision and chooses Lena Valerian, or is she worried that she's going to get the stick by her father if she fails him in his ambition to bring their family into the royal line. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're keeping it, ambiguous on purpose. Some last week I was like, I think she's kind of excited to get off the bench and get into the game.
Right.
But a lot of the episode today, she seemed, to be playing it pretty, straight down the middle, to where she's basically just daughter of the hand and doing what, father tells me to do. And even when she's getting him ready to go into battle, to go face down Daemon, he says, you're the most comely girl at court. Why do you sit here and destroy yourself? Just picking at her fingernails and stuff. So, I mean, he's obviously been, fairly demeaning and not oppressive to her, but not a very warm, loving father. So mostly, I think she's just doing what she's told and not really trying to be involved that much. But
seems like it. Really does.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And especially now going forward, she realizes that she could be queen and that she can, have all the trappings that go with that and all the luxury that goes with that and all the power that goes with that. As far as the running of the castle and all that. So she sees, all the power she could have, potentially as queen. I think going forward, she's definitely going to be playing the game more and more intentionally.
Yeah, so we can almost certainly expect to see a transformation of her character, and probably not into something good. But, only time will tell, I guess.
Right. I mean, she's the daughter of Otto Hightower, so my hopes aren't very high for her.
Yeah. So Viserys finally finishes his sentence. I intend to marry Lady Alicent Hightower before spring's end, and it's just like chaos kind of erupts in the room, subtle chaos. It's so funny. The one decision he actually makes on his own is a bad one. He goes with emotion over logic, failing to live up to the example set by Jaehaerys, who put aside his own emotion because he clearly wanted his daughter Rhaenys to be the heir. But he put aside emotion and did what was best for the realm. And Viserys is just doing the exact opposite. It's funny because he wants so desperately to live up to Jaehaerys in terms of maintaining peace and everything like that. But he just doesn't understand the dynamics of the situation here, and he makes the wrong decision and does exactly the opposite of what his role model and father or uncle did, 9+ years before at this point. So Corlys is extremely frustrated by this, and he starts, railing away, and we'll get more into that later. But with this decision, in one fell swoop, he angers his most powerful ally, Corlys, who's the richest dude in the realm, pushes him towards Daemon, and as well, he pushes Rhaenyra away, who now feels betrayed and deceived by both her father and Alicent. Things may have been cool if they had just been open about the whole situation, but he had to tell her, don't talk about this to Rhaenyra. And interestingly, it seems like she hadn't mentioned it over the 6 months that this has been going on, so she had already been keeping it a secret, which, may say something about her character. Maybe not, but it's interesting stuff for sure. Yeah. So right at the end of the scene here, Corlys is all mad. This is an absurdity. My house is Valyrian, the greatest power in the realm. And I'm thinking, wow, the greatest power in the realm? Are you elevating yourself above the crown for that statement?
And I wrote that down as a note too. I was like, your ships and your money may be the second greatest power in the realm.
Yeah, compared to the dragons.
Targaryens have dragons, and they have a lot of dragons. So check yourself.
So funny. Alt-Shift-X was talking about how, the Game of Thrones is going along, and there's the game, but as soon as a couple dragon riders show up, it's like all the other pieces become instantly irrelevant, like they're not even playing.
Exactly.
Which is what we see when Rhaenyra shows up at Dragonstone, which we'll talk about in a bit. But Viserys is not happy about Corlys saying, "You're the greatest power in the realm." He says, "And I am your king." And right at this moment, you get the smuggest look ever from Otto Hightower, who's just glaring at Corlys like, yeah, bitch made motherfucker.
Definitely.
Which is hilarious. And Rhaenyra's very upset. She looks at Alicent, who is not making eye contact with her, and until she forces Alicent to look, and then she storms out of the room, and Viserys calls out to her, but she ignores him and leaves. And it's so unfortunate because they had just like rekindled their relationship and sort of made amends after 6 months, and it's very bad timing. So that wraps up my number 5. What is your number 4, Lord Zach?
All right. My number 4 is Rhaenyra. She was pretty heavily featured this episode, had a lot going on with, and this is, my number 4 includes everything except her scene with Rhaenys, which, is further down my list.
Sounds good. My number 3 is Rhaenyra as a leader as well. So we'll
nice.
collab as we cover over all of our scenes.
Absolutely. So at the very beginning, she and the small council, they're talking about, what they should do. Corlys wants action. Viserys has, said, we have envoys, going to Pentos. And it's just, basically two very opposing or opposite courses of action. And Rhaenyra speaks up. She's the princess of Dragonstone. She's heir to the Iron Throne, or heiress to the Iron Throne. She's like, Father, we have dragon riders. Very cool that she first mentions it, in Valyrian.
Right.
She says something in Valyrian, or maybe that was when
that was with the egg.
They came in to report about the egg. Because those guys, those dragon keepers, were talking in Valyrian, and she says something, asking about which egg did Daemon take.
In this scene, however, it's interesting because Rhaenyra here in this part, I feel like, is serving as a proxy for the viewers, who are probably all screaming in their heads like I was, you have dragons, damn it, send the dragons,
Exactly. The meta commentary is like, you have all these dragons, you have dragon riders. I mean, I'm thinking worst case, if Viserys really wanted to, he could go tame another dragon, an unclaimed one. Maybe. I mean, would be very... How
did he ever get Valyrian?
Not in his character. But I mean, if it was all out war and they had to launch the missiles, fire the missiles, launch all dragon riders, DEFCON 1.
Yeah.
They could. So she has that idea, and it's just immediately shot down by Otto, shot down by Viserys. Like, nobody wants to hear any of that. And I mean, she even says as a show of force, not necessarily, go in there and, burn them down, show of force, get them to stand down or leave the stepstones, or there would be a diplomatic way to use the dragons before, the ultimate, the forceful way to use them.
Right.
So they immediately just dismiss her, and not only just to dismiss her idea of using the dragon riders as a potential solution in the stepstones, but they immediately dismiss her from the room.
Right.
And, can we find a better use of the princess's talents?
And it's Otto doing it too.
Exactly. Otto says that. And
Puppet
then
master.
Viserys just says, Lord, what's his name? Harold Westerling. Viserys says, Lord Harold Westerling, why don't you take Viserys to go pick out a new Kingsguard, like picking out a puppy or something. So
right.
That's how they treat that task. So
it's so lame.
It's completely demeaning to her,
big time. And that's like, this is her first moment in this episode where she shows an example of decisive leadership that's like worthy of being a queen. Right at that moment when she makes that suggestion. Oh yeah, and Corlys sticks up for Rhaenyra here though before they kick her out. He's like, at least the princess has a plan. Which a jab at the king. He's losing his patience with King Viserys.
Definitely. Then later they have dinner. Which, did you notice the crickets in the background?
I didn't. Highlighting the awkwardness.
That first dinner with Viserys and Rhaenyra, there's definitely is dead quiet, and they're just eating and not saying anything at the beginning. There are literal crickets in the background. It was really funny.
They can't be on the ground floor though. That's hilarious that they're up
way
in
tower.
Up
in the tower. Somehow there's still a cricket that gets into the Red Keep.
Epic.
But they get to talking and they start opening up to each other a little bit, and then she says, about at small council today, and he just immediately, Viserys just cuts her off and says, don't worry about it. Forget about it. And then she tries to explain herself again, and he cuts her off again and says, I wrote it down. You're young, you'll learn.
Right.
And just, she's trying to say, I was thinking of it using the dragons diplomatically, or, kind of explaining her thought process throughout the small council meeting. And he just cuts her off, verbally in the conversation. And it's like, no wonder y'all have hardly spoken in the last 6 months. She has an idea, immediately gets dismissed, and then tries to explain herself later, that night, presumably over dinner. And it's the same thing. Just don't worry about it. Forget about it. You're too young. You'll learn how to run a kingdom later, So
right.
Which ties into her conversation with Rhaenys. And then she, when she's talking to Daemon at Dragonstone, he says, you were chosen to be heir. And she says, he didn't choose me. He spurned Daemon.
Yeah.
Or maybe she was telling that to Otto or somebody. I can't remember.
To her aunt Rhaenys, the princess.
So there is an element of truth to that, because that scene, that happens between Viserys and Daemon on the Iron Throne. I mean, Viserys is on the Iron Throne with Daemon there, in the throne room. And then right after that, we get Rhaenyra, with her ceremony being named, heiress to the Iron Throne. So,
yep.
I mean, she was chosen because she's the only heir, and he uses that as justification to be overly protective of her later in the episode. But, she doesn't feel like she's been chosen to be the heir. I love that mug. That's awesome. So it's really, really interesting how last episode she gets all this pomp and circumstance and gets named, heiress to the Iron Throne, but now she's still the cupbearer, still gets, basically thrown out of small council meetings when she has a good idea.
Yeah.
And she's not being treated like Princess of Dragonstone.
Yeah, and Viserys says, "Oh, you'll learn." Well, when? He says, "I'm sorry I've wasted all these years when I should have been considering you my heir." She should be at his side at all times, learning how to run the kingdom and learning about all of this stuff. I mean, she was there, but only as a cupbearer, which, like you said, is demeaning. But it's ridiculous. If she's going to be the heir, he should be training her constantly.
Exactly.
So I wonder if that signals some kind of hesitance on his part to actually go through with it.
Right. More to come. Tune in for next week's episode.
Yeah. Anything else you got on that?
That's pretty much it.
All right. I got a couple more things to add. After she's relegated to choosing a new Kingsguard, she's in there in the map room, which doesn't have a map yet, with Sir Harold, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and with Sir Otto Hightower, Lord Otto Hightower. And Princess Rhaenys is watching as all this is unfolding. But she's learning that these knights who are being on the short list for joining the Kingsguard, none of them have seen actual battle before. And so she does learn that Criston Cole has seen battle, and she makes a decision to bring him in to the Kingsguard immediately. Otto does not look happy, even before he's introduced, when Sir Harold is placing his little logo, his statuette on the position on the board, which it's kind of cool how they have all these statues representing the different houses and stuff that they're using for the processes. I like that detail. But as he places down the statue of for Criston Cole, Otto Hightower is not looking happy about it. And so Rhaenyra, interestingly, is notably warmer towards Sir Criston than she is the other combatants.
Yep.
And she chooses him immediately. And when Otto rebuts her and says that, maybe this isn't the best idea. Seaguard, for instance, they're prime defense against Reavers. Maybe another house might be a better choice. And she puts him in his place. Well, those men are tourney knights, and my father should be protected by a man who's known real combat. Should he not? And he's like, of course, princess. And,
she's got a great point.
Well, let us plan Sir Criston's investiture then. And bitch made.
Exactly, yeah. She showed him. And I guess that process, investiture, I love that word.
Yeah,
it's a cool word. But I guess that happens pretty quickly. because just within a few scenes, he's
in
with Otto and the delegation from King's Landing headed to Dragonstone, with his armor and everything. So
exactly, and that's where we next get Rhaenyra's. So when hiring Kristen Cole, picking him for his combat experience, another decisive leadership move that she's showing that she can be decisive and using good logic. And then we get over to Dragonstone, and as after Caraxes appears, the bloodworm, and he's squealing with his unique dragon sounds, we hear another dragon in the distance, and the fog that's surrounding this stone bridge starts to roil and undulate, and it lifts up in a wave, and Syrax comes flying out from the fog, and just like the coolest entry ever. And she lands him right on the bridge and approaches, and Otto is not happy about this. Also, he might see this as a moment where he may have been able to get rid of Daemon. Finally, after all these years, he made sure the king wasn't coming, and now it's just him and Daemon. And maybe he thought that there'd be some way to take him out of the picture. But he's like, "What are you doing here, princess?" Preventing bloodshed, and he tries to intervene, but she basically just ignores him. He tells Sir Criston to escort her to safety, and she ignores it all and just says, "Take care not to startle Syrax, my lords. She's rather protective of me." Subtle threat. And Otto backs down again. "Bitch made, motherfucker!" She keeps making him bitch made all throughout this episode, which is hilarious. And she has an interesting conversation with Daemon in High Valyrian, discussing the circumstances, and we'd come to learn here that Mysaria didn't know anything about his Daemon's proclamation or his his claim that she was pregnant, and she storms off. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And Valyrian, High Valyrian, is a pretty beautiful sounding language, I will say. It sounds pretty classy.
Very cool.
And they have this showdown here, which is epic. She switches back to English, and she's like, "I'm right here, uncle. The object of your ire. The reason you were disinherited." Is like, if you want to be back as heir, you need to kill me, so do it. Be done with all this bother. And then he stares her down, and I think he's impressed with her poise and initiative in this moment, realizing that, like, wow, she actually is a force to be contended with. Like, she's played this really well in terms of the game chessboard. And he relents, backing down, turning away, and then turning back and kind of playfully tossing her the egg. And
she, Daemon, Luke Skywalker's that egg. Remember when he just tosses it over the cliff? It's like, what? What is going on?
It's such a valuable object.
Whatever that is, episode 7 or 8.
Yeah, The Force Awakens.
I was like, when he just tossed it over his shoulder like that, I was like, oh, he Luke Skywalker that dragon's egg. My number 2 was Coming on the Clouds. And Syrax and Rhaenyra's entrance there on that bridge at Dragonstone. And it was really neat. It was basically the reverse of how Dany shows up to the Battle of the Gold Road or the Loot Train. What they call it?
Loot Train.
Because the Khalasar is all charging down the hill on horseback, and then you hear Drogon's roar, and then he just appears out of the clouds, and then Jaime and Bronn and all the Lannister army is like, oh my goodness, what have we gotten ourselves into? So, basically, I wish, and it was cool. I love the way they did it. And you saw the clouds moving a little bit and then a lot. So obviously the dragon is getting closer and closer to the, the surface of the clouds. But I wanted to see him appear out of the clouds. But the way they did it was more of a surprise effect for everybody on the bridge. And he just whoosh, does this extremely low pass over the bridge, circles around, and you see Caraxes sitting, over on his side. Syrax flies around and comes around and lands behind, Hightower and co.
And this is our first time seeing 2 dragons on opposite sides of...
Basically, potentially, on opposite sides of a conflict. Really cool.
Foreshadowing, I would dare say. So interestingly, they're playing this game of chicken here, Daemon and Rhaenyra, and Daemon blinks first and he backs down. And you can tell that, deep down, he does love Rhaenyra. And he seems to have this trait where, as ambitious as he is, his love for his family ends up winning in the end, for the most part so far. Backs down here.
They didn't really cover, what's to become. They got the egg back, but what about Daemon squatting on Dragonstone? The story didn't really resolve that matter.
Yeah, it seems like Viserys doesn't really care too much. Rhaenyra is like, this is my castle you're squatting into. That was kind of funny.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. So the next moment of Rhaenyra being, that's our next moment of Rhaenyra showing leadership. She shows up, prevents bloodshed, accomplishes the mission, and rides back to King's Landing on top of her dragon like a freaking hero, And Viserys had no idea that she even left because somebody comes in and tells her, the princess has returned from Dragonstone. He's like, what? What?
Yeah, you would think somebody would have said the princess has just departed for Dragonstone when she left to go to the dragon pit.
Yeah, right. And he's mad that she disobeyed him and everything, but really you can tell he's like, you're my only heir. You could have been killed. He's just worried about her safety and kind of freaking out. And he's like, you went to Dragonstone. And she's like, and retrieved the egg without bloodshed, a feat I'm not sure Sir Otto could have accomplished alone. Yep. Boom. She's making big moves. And this is something that people of the kingdom will definitely hear of, that will raise their opinions of her, and, solidify their potential desire for her to remain the heir.
Yeah, definitely. With all the gold cloaks on Daemon's side, of that stone walkway, and all the knights and, household guards from Otto Hightower's, delegation of, people. And, did you notice Grand Maester Mellos was with Hightower and the two Kingsguard knights at Dragonstone? Mellos was right there behind him. I'm like,
interesting. I wonder
what's the Maester doing? And this is about to potentially become a skirmish, or a battle.
Well, this plays into my number 4, which
nice.
Which we'll get back to that in a moment. Interestingly, when she explains how she's accomplished what Otto probably would not have been able to without bloodshed, this kind of softens Viserys again, and he, yes, well, sometimes I forget how alike you both were, and I'm thinking, who? But then he starts talking about her mother, and it's clear that he sees her mother in Rhaenyra at this point. And this is the moment where they finally start to connect again, and Viserys is lamenting about her mother's absence being a wound that will never heal, and how the Red Keep has lost a warmth that it'll never recover. And Rhaenyra is pleased about this, and to know that she's not alone in her grief. And this is like a moment where they finally make amends with each other, and they both come to terms with the fact that he's got to marry a new wife, and that, things are going to be changing a little bit. And he tells her that he doesn't want to make them estranged, and that he needs a new wife to ensure that they're better defended against whoever may dare to challenge them. And she says, you're the king, and your first duty is to the realm. Mother would have understood this just as I do. And it's like a sweet moment of understanding that's fractured all too soon. Rhaenyra approves of marriage, but not of his choice of Alicent or how they went about it, secretly lying to her during the process, which is kind of shady. But this brings us to my number 4, which is a Maester conspiracy. This is something that doesn't necessarily happen in this episode, but it may be happening in this episode. There's a theory that the Maesters have been plotting against the dragons and are a factor in their extinction, leading, after this point, Aegon shows up with Meraxes, Vhagar, and Balerion the Black Dread, And ever since that point, the dragons are getting smaller with each subsequent generation until, the time of Dunk and Egg, 100 years after this, when the last dragon dies. And the explanation we get is that magic is waning and that the dragons are powered by magic. And when the magic dies, the dragons die as well. But people think that there may be a more sinister explanation going on here, and that the maesters may be playing a role in doing something that's causing the dragons to not develop as well as they would have otherwise developed and grown. So why was Maester Mellos at Dragonstone for this? Maybe the maesters have some kind of dragon deterrent that we're unaware of. And it's typical that Mellos is with Sir Otto, because Otto is Lord of the Hightower, which is an old town where the Citadel is. And it seems to me that they're conspiring with each other to manipulate Viserys to their own ends. And Otto could be in on the dragon conspiracy as well, theoretically. So I wrote down, Otto and the maesters are effectively the deep state of Westeros. Kings come and go, but the maesters always remain in the background. Bureaucrats that hold their positions for life and pull the strings and work the mechanisms behind the scenes to their own benefits, potentially.
And the Faith of the Seven, too, they're also based in Old Town, and they're, an entity that pre-existed Aegon and still exists, through this story and into, the main story of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So, and the Faith and Aegon, had, quite a few difficulties with one another because the church was absolutely against, brother, being wed to sister.
Right.
And now they're still doing, cousins and, uncles and nieces and stuff like that. But the church, put down, pretty, drew a line in the sand for, brothers being wed to sisters, which was Aegon and his two sister wives.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
But they eventually, basically came to some type of agreement to where Aegon was crowned and anointed. There's another phrase.
Another phrase for
I'm pretty sure it's anointed, coronated, but with the blessing of the church.
Right.
So it's, those entities, Westerosi bureaucracy, they, definitely have their own agendas sometimes.
Yeah, and the way you mentioned the faith, the Septons, we got here Otto Hightower and Maester Mellos kind of potentially working behind the scenes with each other. And we had Lord Tywin and Pycelle, who were buddy and
always,
working together too. So it always seems like these bureaucrats will team up with some strong house to go against the leaders that are doing things they don't like, which is pretty interesting. I have to wonder if the Maesters have a thing against Targaryens in general. They could be poisoning Viserys, how his wounds are not healing, how he pricks himself on the throne, which should be nothing. And he's at risk of losing his finger now. Are they poisoning the dragons? Are they poisoning the Targaryens? Even we get in this episode how even Viserys, the dragon rider of Balerion scares him. He says, there are times where I'd rather face Balerion the Black Dread than my own 15-year-old daughter. So Viserys is scared of Balerion. And adding to that last episode, he said, it's an illusion, a myth that we control the dragons. We don't. And so if even the dragon riders are scared of the dragons that they're riding, imagine how scared the maesters must be. Like we talked about, there's a chessboard going on here, and all these factions are vying for power. But as soon as the dragons show up with dragon riders, it's like none of the other pieces even count. So just the mere existence of dragons is a danger to the power of the maesters and their system that they've honed and developed and built over all these countless years. So is there a conspiracy to kill the dragons? Are they poisoning Viserys and making his wounds worse? Did Balerion die of natural causes? You know, you have to wonder. I'm hoping that we learn more about this. I'm wondering if this show may be partially about the Maesters trifling to bring down the House of Targaryen and to make sure as many of their dragons are dead as possible. By the end, they could be pulling the strings to create conflict among the Targaryens, in the hopes that dragons will fight dragon and dragons will fall. You know, it's possible. So we get some playing into this a little bit. We get some details about Viserys's model of old Valyria, and he's talking about the Valyrian capital being built in a volcano, much like Dragonstone. But they claim that they're getting their magic and their power from the volcano, which is an interesting little tidbit of information that we're getting. And he names the building that Dragonstone is seemingly modeled after as the Anagrion, which is an interesting name, where the blood mages worked their craft. So there was a TV show in development years ago at this point about the doom of Valyria. And I guess George R. R. Martin and co. had been developing lore for this about old Valyria. And when it was scrapped, they didn't have any opportunities to employ all that lore that they had been designing for the whole time. So I'm wondering here if this are just throwaway information that they didn't get to use in the Doom of Valyria series, or if the blood magic and all of this stuff is hints at something that's going on. Maybe the Maesters, when they forge their Valyrian steel chain link, that means that they've mastered, certain aspects of dark magic and stuff. So could they be using some kind of dark magic to affect the dragons, which eventually results in their extinction? Interestingly,
possible.
Yeah, it's possible, right? Interestingly, the mention of the volcano I found intriguing, because we learned from Jaqen H'ghar that this is where the faceless men originated as slaves working in the mines under the volcano, who were desperate to escape the horrors of the monsters and chimeric creatures running rampant that were created by the Valyrian lords using their blood magic. I wonder if that'll end up being relevant to the story too. Anybody could be a faceless man. We don't know. They could be Otto Hightower could be a faceless man. Mellos could be a faceless man. Anybody could be one. So we have to keep that in the back of our minds a little bit. Real life historical parallel. Valyria seems to be a parallel for Atlantis. Both were brought to their destruction by their own technology and actions. Viserys says here that, Alicent is with him and she compliments his model, and it's truly wondrous what you've built. And he's like, oh no, I only pore over the histories and provide the plans. The stonemasons built the structures. But Viserys should not be a king. He's like a historian. He spends more time focusing on his models than he does running King's Landing, let alone the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. We learned from him that Valyria had over 1,000 dragons and a navy large enough to span the seas of the world. And I thought that was an interesting detail. But these mentions of blood magic and all of this stuff makes me wonder if there's something more going on with the Maesters and a conspiracy to kill the dragons. It sounds like it's out of left field, but maybe we'll learn something about that.
I like it.
Nice. So what about your number 3?
All right, my number 3 is Made from the Same Cloth.
All right.
Damon and Corlys, the closing scene of the episode. It opens and you're not sure where you're at, but then you see that that Corlys Velaryon is talking, and within maybe 5 or 10 seconds, they do kind of a slow pan. I'm like, oh, he's talking to Daemon.
Yeah, he's got to be.
And I was able to guess that, because, I've read Fire and Blood. So, I remember the high points of what happens going forward in the future. And basically, I don't want to give anything away, but I was like, but it just made sense that Corlys, pull up a map of Westeros, but Driftmark, is off the eastern coast of Westeros, not too far south or north from Dragonstone, I don't think. So not too far from the Stepstones. It was just like, Daemon is at Dragonstone, Corlys is at Driftmark, so it's obviously very easy, and Daemon has a dragon that he can just fly from
without
point A to
anybody
point B.
knowing.
So I right away, before they showed Daemon, I realized that's who he was talking to.
Makes sense.
And Corlys isn't actually a second son, but he brings up that phrase, we're second sons. Daemon obviously is, because, Viserys is the eldest and he's king, but Daemon is the next, son from their father. So, if Viserys never had any heirs, then the throne would go to Daemon. So that's where he feels, he's still, the rightful heir, because Rhaenyra, is female and all that. But that was a really interesting conversation that they had. Tyrion was a second son.
True.
Obviously
And
Jaime and Cersei. Jaime and Cersei, were twins and, born at the same time. So Tyrion was a second son, but still able
Jon
to...
Snow, second son.
Basically. The first son of Rhaegar and Lyanna. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But...
Spoiler alert.
he, basically Robb was the oldest, and I think age-wise, Jon was the next son, in the household, but obviously not a natural-born Stark.
Right.
I'm trying to... Is Bran... Because Rickon and...
Yeah, Bran's older than Rickon.
So,
he would
I'm just trying to think of
the second
other
son.
second sons we've
Sandor
come across
Clegane.
In the series.
The Hound.
So, and then there's... I don't think the second son's sellsword company comes up in the show, but in the books, there's several different... the Golden Company is the main, the biggest and most wealthy and well-known sellsword company in the East. But Second Sons is another one, and Tyrion and Jorah, end up in their company for a while in the books. And with they end up serving Dany, in Yunkai and Meereen.
Sort of symbolically, the firstborn sons end up being the lords and the kings, and the second sons have to go out and forge names for themselves in a different way, whether by fighting wars or doing whatever they're going to do.
Doing these, all these voyages that Corlys has done. And so even though Corlys is the Lord of Driftmark, Master of the Tides, Master of Ships, he was, in reality, he's firstborn, but he's trying to identify with Daemon as this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, piece together and, cut, he says, they cut their way through the world. Nothing is given to them and has to be made or taken.
I think he sees the Valyrians as a whole as sort of the second sons of the surviving Valyrians. Because you mentioned, they were never dragon riders. They've always kind of been overshadowed. They arrived to Westeros first, but as soon as the Targaryens showed up, they were overshadowed by their prowess and their dragons and everything. So from his perspective as a Valyrian, they're kind of playing second fiddle to the Targs in terms of the only surviving Valyrians.
So it makes sense from a political and a maneuvering standpoint for Corlys to enlist the help of Daemon in dealing with his problem. He basically sees this as his problem, not Westeros's problem, because the king doesn't want to address the problem. So Corlys says, "Okay, it's my problem to solve. Why not?" Obviously the king doesn't want to do what needs to be done, to make the tough decision. He wants to send envoys and play it slow. I'll go to Daemon, who we know can be brutal and rash and
cool,
very, very cruel and hardcore. So why not?
I said cool, not cruel, just for the record.
Okay. So why not employ him to potentially, either team up or just, give Daemon a big pat on the back and send him and his dragon down to the stepstones to, just take care of business all by himself. We'll see what happens. I'm not watching the coming up next week.
Yeah, I didn't watch it this week
Every
either.
week, I'm watching the inside the episode where they're talking about what happened.
Oh,
but
cool.
I skip over the, here's what's coming on next week's episode.
Right.
I heard some podcaster talking about how they were surprised how much they showed. I'm like, oh, well, glad I didn't watch it. Because I like each episode to be, I'll watch a trailer before the whole season comes out.
Yes.
But week to week, I don't want to see, what's going to happen next week.
Yeah, same here. Not a big fan of that. I never watched Next Week On in Game of Thrones.
That's pretty much what I had for number 3.
All right. Sounds good. So let's see. My number 2 is the Rogue Prince, Daemon himself. And the Rogue Prince is a title of one of the Game of Thrones short stories, I believe, which must be about Daemon probably taking over Dragonstone, although I can't remember what the details are. It's been forever since I listened to it in audiobook format. But yeah, Daemon he's freaking hilarious. He's out here making proclamations to the kingdom about Mysaria marrying him, or that they're going to be married, and how she's pregnant. But we learned she doesn't even know about it. He's like, it's just hilarious. He's lying, and just like everything that he's doing here, it seems to be he's just desperate for the attention of Viserys. You know, he's just craving his attention and approval, and it's hilarious. But yeah, the fact how apparently in the books that we have available, that George R. Martin had written from the perspective of maesters and everything, the accepted history is that Mysaria was pregnant, but this seems to be an example of a place where the maesters got history wrong, which makes sense because the public proclamation by Daemon was, oh, she's pregnant, you know, and everything. But in reality, it was a lie. And so history, you can't always trust the history books, apparently. You know, this is a lesson that we need to learn. We can't, history, his story, written by the victors. And so I wonder if we'll see more instances of this throughout the show, where we discover that real events differ from the accounts in historical records written by maesters. But yeah, we get some psychological insight to Daemon here, which is, like I mentioned earlier, as much as he's driven by his own ambitions, he has a strong love of his family. And like you mentioned with Corlys in the last scene of the episode, Corlys starts to talk down about King Viserys, and Daemon cuts him off. He's like, like, I will say whatever I want about my brother, but you will not. You know, so he's at odds with Viserys, but he's still defending him and defending the Targaryen's place at the top of the totem pole. It's like, reminded me of how, like, there'll be like multiple families of the mafia, like you got the Gambinos and the Genoveses, but as soon as somebody comes to threaten their craps game, they'll team up together. You know, they'll be competing against each other for the top dogs of the mafia position. But as soon as somebody threatens their profits, they'll team up and work together to eliminate the threat. And so that seems to be like a kind of thing going on here a little bit with Daemon, where he's like, I'm mad at the king, but you don't get to talk shit about him. Only I can do that. You're still just the sea snake, which is a really cool nickname, by the way. I like that. So yeah, Dragonstone is clearly designed after that Valyrian building we mentioned before. When Sir Crispin shows up, or Crispin, that's what he calls him. Kristen Cole shows up and he calls him Crispin, just kind of like how Jamie was mispronouncing Dickon Tarley's name.
Yeah,
you know, in season 7 or something like that. Pretty funny. And he's like, "Oh, Kristen, my prince. My apologies. I couldn't recall." And Kristen zings one back at him. "Perhaps my prince recalls when I knocked him off his horse." I was like, "Oh, you got him. Yeah, I got him." So that was pretty funny. And we get to learn that Mysaria is not actually pregnant and that she can't have kids. And we get a little bit of backstory on her in the next scene where all this is revealed. And we learn that she's kind of got a similar backstory to Melisandre, and not an unsimilar name as well. Melisandre, Mysaria, they've both kind of been owned forever. I'm not saying that Mysaria is Melisandre in secret, but that would be pretty funny.
She can take different forms.
Yeah, but back to the bridge over there. Yeah, exactly. She could be anybody. She's practically a faceless man with that.
Mysaria had one of those hexagonal necklaces.
Yeah, is she wearing the necklace? I gotta rewatch for that. But when they're back on the bridge and they're facing off, and it's Otto squaring off with Daemon, and Otto's like, "Are you mad? You'd never survive this throwdown. And Daemon's like, well, happily, neither would you, because I got the dragon.
Exactly. Yeah, I wrote that as a note. Mutual assured destruction.
Yeah, definitely.
Otto's like, Otto hates Daemon. Daemon hates him just as much or more.
As much.
And so Otto's like, you never survive this. Well, that's fine. Neither will you,
Neither will you, baby. Yeah, so he's like, to choose violence here is to declare war against your king. And Daemon's like, wonderful. Bust out the sword. And I'm like, dude, this guy is crazy. Like, he's he's the Charlie Day of Always Sunny of this. He's the wild card.
Yeah.
And Caraxes, interestingly, has some unique dragon sounds that we haven't heard before. People have been saying,
very cool.
Yeah, in Game of Thrones, all the dragons kind of looked alike. You can hardly tell them apart except for their colors, and even that was not easiest to tell. They all made the same sounds, but we're getting some variations here. And, he's long and skinny like a worm. He's got the two little winglets in the back, like you mentioned last week. I'm looking forward to seeing what the other dragons look like, because it seems like they're making an effort to make them each unique at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I want to see what they look like going forward.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. So that's when Rhaenyra shows up, and then we skip ahead and we learn that Mysaria had no idea about any of this, and she's all mad. And she says, like, I didn't come to you into your service wanting gold or power or station. I came to you to be liberated. And he's like, liberated from what? From fear, And,
that was a powerful line. I wrote that down as well.
Yeah, that was pretty badass. So it's going to be interesting to see, I think fear is going to come back.
Remember what Syrio taught Arya about fear?
What did he tell her?
Fear cuts deeper than swords.
Ah, yeah. Nice. Good throwback.
That's,
dude.
And everybody in this story, they're scared of losing power. They're scared of, losing their place in the line of succession. Rhaenyra with future heirs, Daemon with Rhaenyra,
Alicent just
being
constantly
named heir. Yeah, Alicent just falling into this place about to become queen. What's she going to do going forward to make sure that her and her people don't lose their spot, as it relates to the Iron Throne. So definitely so there's a lot, fear is a very big motivator, and, fear cuts deeper than swords.
You look outside and you see a bunny running around, and the bunny is terrified, or a bird. They land on a branch and they're looking around them in all directions for predators. People don't understand that right now as humans, we're living not unlike Viserys in this bubble of luxury and safety and peace, relative peace.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's not the way nature works. We've built this artificial structure for ourselves, and we better, preserve it, because otherwise fear will make a big comeback with us as well. And
100%.
That's why human psychology has been so different in history, because they were driven largely by fear and maintaining, trying to survive in very difficult circumstances.
Yep.
Okay, we were at the accent. You wanted to talk about the accent, right?
Yeah, overall, I at the beginning of the scene, her accent, seemed to be okay. And I've heard that this actress, I'm unfamiliar with her, but I've heard that she's been good in other projects. I think mostly other TV series. I don't know if she's been in any, movies or anything, but I've heard that she's, most people like her and she's a pretty good actress. So I don't think it's an acting problem, but the accent just seems super it's sort of French, but it's sort of not. And
Yeah.
I can't really place it. And it just, like I said at the beginning, it didn't seem that bad to me. But as the scene wore on, it just got, to me, it just seemed worse and worse. And it just seemed real clunky with her trying to, say her lines with that accent and then, respond in a genuine way and have Matt Smith, as Daemon, interact with her. I don't know. I wasn't really feeling that accent they tried to get her to do. Just do a normal French accent. It was just, I don't know.
Yeah, it was weird. It took me out of it for a moment too. I was kind of like, what is going on here?
And I didn't really notice it that much that last week. She didn't have very many lines. So I guess, it was sort of, that same thing with the beginning. It didn't seem too bad, but
yeah,
when she became more and more passionate about, her, being bought and sold, countless times and, she wanted to be liberated from fear. But that was a really good line, and I wanted it to hit home, with me, as an audience. But and it did. It's not that it was bad, but that's one of my two gripes. So. One of my two gripes of the episode.
What was your other gripe?
My other gripe was the Kingsguard's Magneto helmet.
Oh, I was gonna say I liked that. That was something I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it just looks. I mean, it has a cool look to it, but it just looks incomplete. I went back and looked. Oh, it's Loki.
Our mascot.
Everybody, you got to go watch the YouTube video version because Loki is perched on Sir Duncan's shoulder, just sitting there hanging out.
Our dragon mascot.
It's like the helmets that Barristan Selmy and Jamie had at the beginning of the series. They had that similar shape, but they had these little fins kind of across the top that just gave it a little bit more complete look. All I can see with these Kingsguard is just a helmet and nothing more, and just that shape, and it kind of comes to a point. It's straight up Magneto.
Yeah, it's Magneto
out of X-Men.
See, I saw it and I was like, "Oh, it looks like Magneto. That's so cool."
Yeah, I mean, it's cool for Magneto, but they just took me out of it for a second. Right? This is Westeros, and this is what their helmets look like. 100 years after Aegon's conquest. But hey, I mean, they went for it, and a lot of people probably do like it. But I just couldn't get the Magneto helmet out of my mind.
That's so funny. Yeah, Magneto. What a crazy guy.
That's all I had for that.
All right. So now I think we're on to number one. What is your number one, Lord Zach?
My number one is, I called it The Order of Things.
Ooh.
Basically, Rhaenys and Rhaenyra's conversation there in King's Landing. Rhaenyra sees what's happening with her dad awkwardly and clumsily and cringily having a first date of sorts,
with a 12-year-old.
walking along the path with a 12-year-old, and she's saying all the lines that her dad was supposed to say, and then the king's like, "What did your mom say?" It's like, I have 2 more years before we have to go to bed. It's like, oh, come on, and that little girl in the wig and everything. It's just like, but Rhaenyra is looking at all that, and obviously is perturbed by it, at the very least. But it was just this really cool interaction between Rhaenys, who's basically been through this whole scenario, more or less raised as, the eldest daughter of the eldest son of King Jaehaerys. Then he dies some which way or another, and then she's left, presumably being the heir of the eldest son, and she's been through all this, and and it's one of the lines that was in the trailer that basically framed what the show was going to be about. And she says, "Men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne." And that's just, in a nutshell, that is the Dance of the Dragons.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Help! I'm in a nutshell. How did I get into this nutshell?
And, she thinks that Rhaenyra thinks Rhaenys is trying to, get an emotional response from her. But I think we talked about it last week, that is Rhaenys jealous, or is she happy for Rhaenyra, being named heir to the Iron Throne? And I was like, I think she's probably has some regret that it wasn't her, but ultimately this is potentially the male wheel of Westeros being broken.
Mm-hmm.
But
I feel like she sympathizes with her on a number of levels.
Exactly. She definitely does sympathize with her, but she's also old enough and wise enough to know what has been promised may not be fulfilled.
Yeah, totally. The game is everlasting.
And, and the way, Danny talked about, the wheel, and she talks about the order of things. Something kind of toward the end of their conversation, after she says, they'd rather put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne. And Rhaenys says, "And your father is no fool."
Right.
I'm thinking, like, at the first watch, I wasn't really sure how to take that line. I'm like, we know he's not a fool. He may not be the most decisive, the best king, but
he's not Mushroom.
Right. He's not a fool either, but on the rewatch, I'm sort of thinking that what she meant by that was Viserys is no fool, and so he also knows that many, many men would rather put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne. So Viserys, since Viserys is no fool, he's going to look for a way to remedy Rhaenyra being the heir, a female being the heir to the Iron Throne. What do you think about that? He's no fool.
Yeah, I pretty much thought the same thing, that, when it comes down to it, if he has to pick between a legitimate male heir who's directly of his own blood and Rhaenyra, that, he might do the same thing that Jaehaerys ended up doing. And I think Rhaenys is worried about that, and she's kind of prepping Rhaenyra for that potential eventuality. Say that 10 times fast. Potential eventuality, potential eventuality, potential eventuality,
exactly.
Potential eventuality.
And, Rhaenyra is young and, very idealistic. And she said, well, when I'm queen, I'll make a new order. And
that sounded very Daenerys-like.
Yeah, exactly. That was a very, Daenerys Targaryen. When I become queen, I'll break the wheel. When I become queen, I'll liberate, the people of Slaver's Bay, and she did that. But then, what she did to King's Landing, and then she said, oh, I'll liberate Winterfell. We'll liberate Dorne and everywhere in between. And
we'll liberate Afghanistan. We'll liberate Iraq.
Liberate like you just liberated the people of King's Landing? That's a whole lot of burning.
The sweet release of death. I don't think that's the liberation we're talking about.
Right. So, but that's, Rhaenyra's young, ambitious goal. Well, when I'm queen, I'll change how things are done around here. But obviously that's a very difficult task to accomplish.
Yep. As Viserys would say, you're young, you'll learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything else you want to add about your number one?
No, that's it.
All right, my number one is escalations in the game in general. And the first scene we have with escalations is with Alicent meeting with Viserys again, and they're examining his model of Valyria, and she makes a move here. They end up talking about how he has to pick a new wife and everything, and she kind of is wondering who it might be, and he drops the dragon statuette and picks it up, and for a moment they sort of are. They reach and they're like, he's holding her hands for a split second after dropping the statue. And they both kind of seem like caught off guard, like surprised by this like organic moment of intimacy. That
connection.
Yeah, they had like a little bit of a connection there. And she's being slick about this, like saying, oh, whoever it is, I know she'll be kind. Or talking about Laena Velaryon. I'm sure that she's good and kind, and I'm sure that she'll enjoy your company as much as I have. Hinting like that.
Yep.
She wants to be in on the race as well. So he ends up asking Alicent to keep their chats secret and not to mention them to Rhaenyra, and that was interesting. And we learn later that she hadn't told Rhaenyra anyway. It's already been 6 months.
Right, that they've been doing this.
Yeah, so she didn't tell Rhaenyra during that whole time, which is kind of interesting. It's like that sort of leans toward the idea that Alicent is, willingly engaging in the game, choosing to keep Rhaenyra out of it, knowing that she's angling in on Rhaenyra's heirhood or her place in the line of succession. And she's angling and not telling Rhaenyra. So that was interesting. And after this meeting where he tells her to keep it a secret, it cuts to Rhaenyra hanging with Alicent in a sept that we haven't seen before, but it's huge and glorious. Pretty impressive structure. And, she's talking about how it's already only been half a year and they're already trying to marry off her father. And she knows what they're talking about, how they're plotting in their secret councils when she's been sent away, and she's worried for her position. And instead of like telling her the truth, saying that, yeah, like I've been talking with your dad too and stuff, she just blows it off, tells her, oh, you can't worry about the matters of lords and kings. So now Rhaenyra is showing concern about her position, opposite of the first scene in the Godswood, and Alicent here is keeping her in the dark. So I would say that it must be a difficult position for her. You know, do I obey the king and not tell Rhaenyra, or do I be loyal to my best friend and tell Rhaenyra? But as we find out later, in the 6 months that have passed, she hasn't mentioned it at all, that she's been chilling with her dad. So that's kind of crazy. She asks, what if your father were to remarry? And I think at this point, she's gauging Rhaenyra's potential reaction to finding out that she's been courting her father, which is pretty intense. And this is... this is when she mentions that he didn't choose me, he spurned Daemon. I thought that was with Rhaenys, but it was with Alicent in this scene.
Oh, yeah.
And so we see Rhaenyra go to pray, being instructed by Alicent. And this is interesting because Targaryens don't necessarily have a good relationship with the faith of the Seven, as we talked about earlier. They tend to consider themselves more as gods, which...
Right.
Rhaenyra mentioned in the last episode that people see Targaryens as closer to God than humans, but it's only really the dragons that do that. Without them, we're just regular people, which we find out is true, as Daenerys' brother Viserys is definitely not a god, not a god, and can't stand up on his own without dragons. So this is an emotional moment for Rhaenyra as she begins to pray and is like on the verge of tears. As she tries to connect with her mother the way that Alicent does. And she says, I want him to see me as more than his little girl. And it's at this moment where we see that she really feels the need to prove herself, which she begins to do in this episode, especially by regaining Dreamfire's egg from Dragonstone and from Prince Daemon, which is pretty badass. So then we have the awkward child bride scene, where Corlys and Rhaenys are complaining about all the bad stuff that's going on, painting Viserys' rule as really excellent with all the horrible things that are going on today. And they offer a solution, which is to join our families and wed our daughter Laena and unite the two great surviving houses. And it seems like a good idea. So it's at this moment, basically, when Corlys enters the game and is really trying to position himself and his family within the line of kingship. So that was pretty cool to see Corlys stepping up. The realm expects you to take a new wife soon or late, Your Grace, to strengthen your line and produce more heirs, which is basically exactly what Rhaenyra says to Rhaenys later on. Then we have...
Yeah, exactly. And Corlys's tone, Your Grace, do this. Thank you for taking this meeting, Your Grace. He was all prim and proper with all the customs and courtesies when he was trying to, seal, an alliance, with the marriage.
Yep.
But when he storms into the small council, Daemon's, taking the egg. What are we going to do? You need to respond in force. You need to take the stepstones by force. He pulls no punches, and he comes right into the small council chambers, just, firing on all cylinders. But now he's, pulled it all back, and he apologizes for being, so rude before, and, how abrasive he was being in the meeting. But now he's, minding his P's and Q's.
Yeah, definitely some attitude changes throughout this episode with Corlys. He's on a journey to find out what he's got to be doing to preserve his house, that's for sure. And then we get the creepy scene walking through the garden, and this harkens back to Game of Thrones and all the countless scenes we got of scheming within there, and it reminds me of Cartman in the South Park, A Song of Ass and Fire trilogy, where it's like a Game of Thrones and video game console wars spoof trilogy. Pretty badass. And we find out that young Laena here is kind of obsessed with dragons, She's got dragons on the brain like Schlotzky's. You ever see those commercials? Got Schlotzky's on the brain? That's what that made me think of for some reason. Nice. So she's asking about Balerion and what it was like to fly the Black Dread. And then she brings up Vhagar, who's still alive somewhere. Vhagar is one of the original 3 dragons. Balerion, Meraxes, who Aegon's sister wife Rhaenys rode, and Vhagar, Visenya's dragon, who's still out there, but is too large for the dragon pit. Some would say too large for our world.
That's got to be an epic size. Man, so one thing I don't remember from the books is if and when, or yes or no, if Vhagar shows back up and somebody, puts her, they call her. I mean, a lot of in the books, I think they say, officially, dragons are unisex or whatever.
Right. Yeah. They kind of like bounce back and forth. Gender fluid, we could say.
Anyway, they can all have eggs or not. So, it's pretty interesting that, they refer to her that way, but I really want to see if Vhagar shows back up and who gets there. Is he on the blacks or the green side of the dance, and what happens? Because that's one of those details I don't remember. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's going to be cool. And it's interesting that little Lena is like, she's here supposed to be talking about marriage and everything, but all she could think about is dragons, which is funny.
Yeah, exactly. One, kind of poignant line that Viserys had was when they were talking about Vhagar, he says, "Even dragons get lonely."
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's
talking
so
about.
sad.
I threw that as talking about himself.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Being 6 months removed, from the death of his wife. But I mean, also, the dragon itself out there is just living somewhere on the coast, fending for itself.
Yeah, the workers at Spicetown report hearing her songs at times. They say it's a sad
I can't
thing.
remember.
I imagine
Where's
even dragons get
Spicetown?
lonely. Oh,
Where is Spicetown? Is that down in Dorne?
I think it's in Essos somewhere.
Let's see. Is an island off? I'm sorry. Oh, Spicetown was a town on the island of Driftmark in the Crown Lands, located near high tide.
So it is in Westeros.
So, yes, in Westeros, and it's a town on the island of Driftmark, which is the seat of House Valerion. So, not that far from Dragonstone and King's Landing.
So, close by to where she lives.
Yeah.
Unless she lives at court. That is interesting,
I couldn't remember that name, Spicetown. I was like, is that down in Dorne somewhere? Or, down near Volantis or somewhere over there.
Yeah. So that's really sad. Vhagar mourning for her dead siblings, Balerion and Meraxes. And we know that dragons have a full range of emotions and feelings that's comparable to humans. Alt-Shift-X was talking about the blood magic done in ancient Valyria and how some people theorize that the High Lords of Valyria may have concocted dragons by crossing the blood of wyverns and humans, or maybe that the Targaryens were even used in the creation process, or maybe that they were created from the blood of dragons, hence the blood of the dragon.
Right.
Either way, there's got to be some genetic connection between Targs and literal dragons. So that's pretty interesting. And as this is going on, Rhaenys is watching from within the Red Keep, and she's kind of freaking out, upset about all this, as we talked about how she speaks with Rhaenyra. There is another conspiracy theory that the Maesters rigged the vote in 101 AC at the Great Council to save the realm from potential disaster. So that's an interesting little factor that I just remembered as well. She says,
those were.
Oh, go ahead.
That little processional at the very beginning at the Great Council of 101. When I was describing it last episode, I just said those dudes, whoever they were carrying, that crate, down the center aisle. Those are maesters.
Yeah. So whoever counts the vote, decides the winner, basically, right? So they're talking about the Great Council and everything, and Rhaenyra says, "They denied you, Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was, but they bent the knee to me and called me heir to the throne." And Rhaenys shoots back, "Do you remind your father's men of that as you carry their cups?" And it's like, oh man, that kind of puts everything in perspective. Like they're calling you the heir, but they're not treating you like the heir, and you better wise up and start making moves.
Definitely.
Yeah, and we got that line from the trailer you mentioned. So then Otto calls an emergency meeting about Daemon stealing the dragon's egg, and everybody's freaking out about that. And again, we have more indecision by Viserys initially. It's not until that Rhaenys points out that it was Dreamfire's egg, which had been in Balon's crib, which he had stolen. And it's at this point that he gets mad and says, I'm going to Dragonstone, basically. And Rhaenyra also gets mad when she learns that it was Dreamfire's egg. You can see her on her face. It looks like a look of betrayal. Like, why would Daemon do that to me? Because she chose the egg for Baelon. And it's at this point where he says, assemble a detachment, Otto. I will go to Dragonstone and drag Daemon back to face justice myself, Viserys. And Otto says, my apologies, Your Grace, but I cannot allow it. And I'm like, who is really in charge here?
Mm-hmm.
He's telling the king he won't allow something that the king is saying? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, more and more, it's definitely looking like Otto is running the kingdom.
Yeah.
The realm. The Seven Kingdoms.
Big time. Like, he was running everything when Jaehaerys was in his later days and not really up to anything, feeling depressed and out of it a lot, not as enthusiastic as he was after his whole family, his wife was dead and his best buddy, Septon Barth, died and everything. And it seemed like Otto Hightower was kind of running stuff. And it seems like he's kind of still running stuff as Viserys plays around with his Valyria model,
Yeah.
So this then brings us to the final scene with Corlys, and we find ourselves in his office. We mostly talked about this already, but I wanted to point out he's got some cool stuff in there. He's got like a skull of some kind of fish with giant intermeshing teeth that are like huge, like some deep underwater fish. It kind of reminds me of like an anglerfish. They have crazy teeth like that. And then there's that statue that looks like it was underwater for a lot of the time, and half the face is covered with barnacles and stuff. And you can just kind of, by these things, he's been around and gone on oceanic adventures. Pretty cool stuff. So we find out that it's Daemon, and they start planning together and relating over being second sons. And at first, Daemon is not too receptive. He's like, I wasn't aware you had a king for a brother, after he says they've been cut from the same cloth. But he replies, we're both men who have had to cut our own way through the world. We've been passed over too often. And eventually they end up sort of connecting about this whole thing. There's a funny line where Corlys says, I've been petitioning the king to send my navy into the territory, but he's denied me. And Daemon says, it was never my brother's strongest trait. What? Being king. which is hilarious. He's a cool guy, and he's got lots of good traits, but being king is not one of them. And so it's at this point when Corlys goes on his little monologue where he's attacking Viserys. The crab feeder is backed by powerful entities within the free cities who wish to see Westeros weakened, and the king's failures have allowed him to accumulate strength. If those shipping lanes fall, my house will be crippled, and I will not have Driftmark beggared while our king idles himself with feasts and balls and tourneys. And Daemon, he's ambitious, but he's loyal at the same time. And he's like, I will speak of my brother as I wish. You will not, and he kind of backs off that point and starts changing the way his plan of attack, this time appealing to Daemon's sense of ambition, saying, waiting in the stepstones is a chance for you to prove your worth to those who might doubt it. We are the realm's second sons, Daemon. Our worth is not given, it must be made. And sort of the similar attitude to Tyrion, like you mentioned, who spends all his time reading books and had to build everything for himself because Tywin didn't give him anything. He earned a lot of what he does, like the positions that he got. He went from nothing, being a drunk in Essos, to rising to being hand of the queen for Daenerys and so forth. But yeah, this is an interesting scene, foreshadowing some changes in dynamics that'll be probably occurring in the future. I'm expecting some fire over the crab feeder slayer next episode at the stepstones, I'm guessing. But Daemon understands the truth of what Corlys is saying here, that they've got to take action to build their own destinies. And I see a badass alliance in our future with these two.
Definitely, Daemon and his dragon and an army of gold cloaks with, potentially with Corlys and his, fleet of ships.
Yep. Hell yeah. So let's see. Let's see if there's anything we didn't talk about here.
Yeah, we probably covered most of the scenes. I have a couple of random, just little notes, but nothing major.
Okay, what do you got?
So last episode I said that Sir Harold Westerling was Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Got ahead of myself.
He's acting.
Right, Ryam Redwine.
Right.
He was in the background of the Great Council of 101, and I think he was in the background at Rhaenyra's, announcement, or one other time. I think he was in the background. Anyway, they said he died. So now Harold Westerling is Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. So I jumped the gun on that a little bit last week. So one small correction. When she was questioning Kristen Cole about his combat experience, he's Dornish, but I guess his parents are the steward of Lord Dondarrion. So I was a little bit surprised when they said he fought against Dornish incursions,
right? Because he's
along the Boneway in the Dornish marches. But I was like, well, by blood he's Dornish, but if his parents serve, or Lord Dondarrion, then he'd probably he and his parents would be loyal to the Stormlands and Lord Dondarrion. So anyway, I was just interested to learn that even though he's Dornish by blood,
he was willing to fight.
His loyalty seems to be loyal to the crown and the Stormlands, as they're constantly battling with some of the Dornish houses along the Boneway.
The Boneway.
Such a cool name that George came up with that.
Yeah, definitely.
When I realized it was maggots
gross.
He had to stick his hand in there. I thought of two lines from Lord of the Rings when they're from the Two Towers, when the orcs have Merry and Pippin on their backs, and they some of the orcs want to eat them. They said, "All we've had is this maggoty bread for 3 stinking days." So I thought of maggoty bread. And then I think either right before or right after that, one group of orcs meet the Uruk-hai after they captured Merry and Pippin. And they're saying, "You're late." And the Uruk-hai say, "We don't take orders from orc maggots." So the Uruk-hai are this, I know different universe, but they're this like special breed of orcs that Saruman makes, but the old like goblin-looking orcs, are smaller. And anyway, the Uruk-hai was, basically putting them in their place, calling them orc maggots.
Ha! Classic. I got another note too, which is the point when Alicent gives a gift to King Viserys, and this is in the middle of their discussion about how he has to choose a new wife. And she has had the dragon sculpture from his model of Valyria repaired. And he seems really touched by this. He's smiling and he's telling her what a kind gesture it is. And his excitement about this highlights his ill-advised priorities. He clearly cares more about this model than the actual 7 kingdoms that he's ruling over. And with a knock on the door, he composes himself back into king's mode. Or into king mode, and that this to me demonstrates that his guard is really down around Alicent, and he seems to have developed a connection with her. That
definitely,
outside of just being a king, he can be himself with her. So that was interesting. And there's another scene we didn't talk about where Viserys meets with Lord Lionel Strong. Is he the Master of Coin, or is he?
I believe he's the Master of Laws.
Master of
Beesbury,
Laws.
Who's always in his cups. I believe he's the Master of Coin.
Definitely.
Because last episode they said something about, "Oh, don't worry, Lord Beesbury, your gold is going to a good cause," or something like that.
Yep. So Lionel Strong over here, Lord Lionel Strong, he's basically backing the Valerian side of the argument.
Yeah.
And saying that you should marry Laena because the sea snake and Driftmark makes for a better ally than it does an enemy. That's got to be foreshadowing right there. The sea snake has made a calculated reach, a fair play for a man of his position, if you truly want my unencumbered opinion.
Yeah, there you have it.
Yep. And I think that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Did you notice as Otto and his contingent are sailing towards Dragonstone, did you see the ship?
No, I did not. What was it?
Oh man, it's like the camera zooms past the ship, and then at the front there's this big dragon figurehead on the front.
Nice.
Of the ship, and then at the bottom it's like feet, almost like sitting in the water, but you can still see it.
Oh,
or
cool.
It looks like a dragon's feet or something.
They stick out forward?
And yeah, they stick forward, so it could be like a ram of some type.
Yeah, exactly. That could be based off of the ancient Greek vessel called a trireme, which was designed with a ram directly below the waterline to run into other ships and sink them.
Yeah, but basically that's the intro shot for when they're getting to Dragonstone, about to face off with Daemon, and then it zooms past the ship right to the rocks, and I'm like, well, that ship is pointed right to the rocks. They better slow down. But I mean, they're just zooming past it to give you that big, wide shot of dragons,
right.
That front gate, and then Dragonstone, on the hill up there behind it. It's a really cool shot.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and take a look at that. That's killer. All right, that's all I've got too. That wraps up our top 5. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we're back with news about Game of Thrones. From The Hollywood Reporter, House of the Dragon renewed for Season 2 at HBO after premiere ratings blowout, by James Hibbard. Game of Thrones prequel will get a second season as Sunday's first episode ratings climb to 20 million. The move came relatively quickly following the series premiere of Dragon on Sunday, House of the Dragon on Sunday, which delivered 10 million viewers overnight, an HBO record for a series opener and roughly on par with the premiere of Game of Thrones Season 6. Now, HBO reports that in the days since the show's premiere, the first episode's viewership has climbed to 20 million viewers in the U.S. across linear, on-demand, and HBO Max platforms.
We are beyond proud of what the entire House of the Dragon team has accomplished with Season 1, says Francesca Orsi, Executive VP of HBO Programming. Our phenomenal cast and crew undertook a massive challenge and exceeded all expectations, delivering a show that has already established itself as must-see TV. A huge thank you to co-creator and executive producer George R.R. Martin and co-creator and showrunners Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik for leading us on this journey. We couldn't be more excited to continue bringing to life the epic saga of House Targaryen with Season 2.
HBO brass have been bullish on House of the Dragon and previously suggested the company was eager to greenlight another round should the premiere come out of the gate strong.
The renewal may not just be important for Dragon's future. HBO has at least 7 Game of Thrones spin-off projects in development, 4 scripted, at least 3 animated. Dragon opening well enough to warrant a speedy second season renewal could bode well for at least one other project getting an eventual series order.
HBO did not say how many episodes will be in the second season, but another 10 seems like a safe bet. The matter of when the show will return is a bigger question. The first season of Dragon required 10 months of filming and a massive amount of post-production visual effects work, which began in January and is still ongoing. It will be difficult for the production to film and VFX another season by the end of 2023, so 2024 return could be more likely.
No.
And now it's time for Raven's Calls. Oh, that's a duck. My bad. Tarot Spirit says, "Yes, I'm so happy you're back." I'm happy you're back, Tarot Spirit. Thanks for being with us.
Dean says, "Duncan, it's Daemon, spelt like mon, but sounds like man. You're killing me saying it wrong. Bloody Americans."
I talked to Dean about this on YouTube, and the only reason I'm saying it like that is because the Targaryens have this tradition with naming people, and they'll change a few letters of a word but keep the rest. And so Daemon and Aemon are homages to Aegon, the Conqueror. And it's more of a book pronunciation. So the people in the show will say Daemon, but in the books it's pronounced Daemon, Amon. And there's some websites that talk about the pronunciations of things like that, but they didn't list Daemon. But I kind of logically extrapolated it that it would match the others.
Nice,
but
okay.
I know it's pretty weird. So I understand where you're coming from, Dean. Hope to hear from you again soon.
Johnny Stitches, Johnny. Thanks for the Sirenicide and hearing the haunted shout out. It's good to have some dragons back in our lives.
Dragons, baby. I wouldn't miss shouting out my favorite horror podcasts. Matthew Repp. I don't know why I'm reminded of the time Hulk Hogan ended up dating his teenage daughter's best friend. Come to think of it, the Hulkster has that platinum blonde hair of a Targaryen. Daemon tossing that egg around like Tom Brady with the Lombardi trophy. I didn't see that, but it sounds funny.
Classic. Sarah Larkham says, it was an amazing episode, and I like the time jump of 6 months since the pilot episode.
Yeah.
I love seeing Rhaenyra on top of her dragon. I'm loving this series so much that I hope they can keep it up for the entirety of its run.
Yeah, that would be great. Keep the quality good. And the Lombardi thing reminded me of the NHL playoffs this year. Whoever won the Stanley Cup, one of the guys tripped and boom, dented the Stanley Cup on the ice, bent the whole lower part. Pretty brutal. All right, that's it for Ravens Galls for this week. Just so you guys know, we'll be recording on Monday evenings for the duration of the season. So make sure to get your feedback into us early by Monday afternoon so we can include it in the show. I forgot to give you guys advanced warning of that, but yeah, now you know. So we'll look forward to hearing from you on Monday next week. All right. That's our show, episode 122. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks so much.
And a huge thank you to John Bailey, the epic voice guy from the Emmy-nominated Honest Trailers, for announcing our show. And on another note, if you enjoy my take on things, you might be excited to learn that I'm working on a project of my own. It's a series in novel screenplay hybrid form that I'm already over 1,100 pages into writing. Just imagine the Da Vinci Code, Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, Stargate, Journey to the Center of the Earth, National Treasure, Project Blue Book, War of the Worlds, Splinter Cell, and Independence Day all rolled into one post-World War II era epic. Solving the mystery of the pyramid's purpose, uncovering the occulted, discovering the history of humanity lost to the ages, deciphering the fate of ancient gods, Egypt, lost civilizations, Tesla, Roswell, flood mythology, Hollow Earth, the fall of the Third Reich. What is the truth at the core of it all? The Core Saga. More details soon. If you'd like to donate or subscribe to support us, you can go to paypal.me/GOM podcast or patreon.com/GOM podcast to donate an amount of your choosing. There are links to both at gameofmicrophones.com. Thanks.
Doing some online shopping, then go over to gameofmicrophones.com, scroll down to the bottom, and click on our link to Amazon. As an Amazon associate, we earn from qualifying purchases. Any contribution you make helps, and you can help secure the continued existence of GOM.
And make sure to check out Sirenicide, the serialized horror drama podcast featuring me and Archmaester Stitches. And after that, check out Hearing the Haunted, his new show, an episodic horror series. Next episode, we'll be covering House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 3, Second of His Name. We'll be recording on Monday afternoons, just to remind you, for the rest of the season, so make sure to get your episode feedback to us as quickly as possible following the show's airtime so we can include your thoughts on Game of Microphones.
If you'd like to call us at 813-JOFFREY. That's 813-563-3739.
If you'd like to write in, you can email us at ravens@gameofmicrophones.com.
Make sure to join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/GOM podcast. Each week, we'll be posting a feedback thread where you can leave your thoughts and comments on the new episode for us to read on air.
Imp slap. You can also watch Game of Microphones on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. Audio podcasts are great, but video is better. We're currently trying to build our minuscule subscriber count, so go to youtube.com/gameofmicrophones and subscribe right now. Likes, comments, and shares are greatly appreciated.
We're also on Twitter, Instagram, Gab, and Minds at GOM Podcast.
And we're on Tumblr too at Game of Microphones. All right, that's our show.
Thanks for listening.
I've been petitioning the king to send my navy into the territory, but he's denied me.
It never was my brother's strongest trait.
What?
Being king. Launch the missiles. Fire this fire. Fire the missiles.
3, 2, 1. Thanks for listening.
Oh. It's like, what's he counting down for?